I have a question. Do you believe that a touch makes a difference? Let me kind of give you an example, and I like to admit it's not one of my finer moments. We discovered this last week. I was thinking prairie dog. Glenn was telling me a minute ago it's a mole that we have in our yard. So I Googled how do you get rid of, prairie dogs, moles, and of course, other than using a shotgun, which since we're on YouTube, I better not go into that. Might be someone from PETA watching. So anyway, Google said get cayenne pepper and pour it all around. So I thought, hey, why not try it? So we went and bought several bottles of cayenne pepper. Now, the wind was not blowing that much really yesterday, but, and I was upwind when I started. I had 3 bottles, started throwing them out, and I discovered that the touch of cayenne pepper on your eye is not very good. So for about 2 hours, I realized on my right eye, touch matters. But for the most part, we love the idea of loving people. Who's going to vote against the idea of love as a concept? But the issue is that some people we need to love are incredibly hard to love. Maybe this is a more accurate statement. We love loving people who are easy to love. Kind of like that statement? I think that pretty much sums up how I feel most of the time. Maybe we need to get a little bumper sticker made that says, I love loving people who are easy to love. Might not be the best bumper sticker, though, for a preacher to have. But, I'm just saying, I think it's pretty accurate. I'm for loving people, but does loving people have limits? Are there people that we are excused from loving? Have you ever thought that there should be an asterisk next to some people? Would God agree that some people, they're just too hard to love? Now, if we try to answer those questions from common sense, we're naturally going to say yes. But if we look at the life of Jesus, the obvious answer is no. Jesus loved with a limitless love. He loved everyone. And the thing is, especially those that were hard to love. And He loved people by meeting people at their point of their deepest need. Now, I want you to look here at if you want to turn to Matthew 8, the verses that Larry read for us. To me, one of the greatest examples of Jesus offering compassion, it's when He touched the leper. Now, if people from Jesus' time, let's say they were on Family Feud. Yeah, y'all familiar with that show? And let's say the question was this. We asked 100 people to tell us someone who's hard to love. I can tell you back in that day, a leper would have been the number one answer. Because leprosy, it's what we know, it was a death sentence. It's an incurable disease where people lose sensation in their extremities. In Jesus' day, it was easy to spot a leper because their skin was discolored, and of course they had the sores all over their bodies, and sometimes they would have fingers and all missing. Now here's something else I discovered this week that I'd never known. And this sounds kind of gross, but it was also easy to smell a leper. They would have this horrible, putrid smell. So people in that day thought leprosy, it was a curse from God. It's very contagious. Someone who came down with leprosy, they became a spiritual and social outcast. They received a life sentence of never being touched. Think about that. No more hugs, no more handshakes, no more kisses. And lepers never approached people. Except for this one here in Matthew 8 who walks right up to Jesus. And again, do you notice there in verse 1? There's a large crowd that's following Jesus, but it became about one man. And we see it time and time again in Scripture. Crowds flocked to Jesus, but He loved and impacted one person at a time. And this person happened to be a leper. Now, there was no precedent for a leper approaching a rabbi in that day. If one did, it was certain humiliation. In fact, some rabbis of that day boasted about throwing rocks at lepers to keep them away. Can you imagine that? Kind of like today, if you get sick, I'd start throwing a rock at you. How do y'all feel? Feeling a little ill? I got a rock here. But Jesus was a rabbi, and He was approachable. Now this leper, he believed in Jesus' goodness enough to approach Him, but not quite enough to be confident that Jesus would heal him, because verse 2 says this, if you're able, you can make me clean. Now he knew Jesus was able. He didn't know if Jesus was willing. And I think the reason why is because he knew he was a person that was hard to love. You know, humans are wired for affectionate physical contact. There's a medical condition known as skin hunger, or some refer to it as touched starved, which occurs when a person receives little or no touch from another living being. And when I was reading that, I thought, well, that's why we have dogs, right? But that's a different story. But if you suffer from skin hunger, it says you experience depression, anxiety, and sometimes even physical problems. Science also tells us that that loving touch can be life-giving. I mean, hospital studies have showed that patients recover more rapidly, either physically or a mental illness, if they're on the receiving end of a touch. Because touch lets us know someone cares, that we're loved. Now, we have no idea here, but can you imagine how much this leper, who hadn't been touched in years, had to feel? Look in verse 3. Verse 3 says, Jesus stretched out His hand and touched him, saying, I'm willing, be cleansed. Immediately, the leprosy was gone. Now here's what I find fascinating about this. Jesus reached out and touched this leper. The word touch there in the Greek means to fasten onto. So, I mean, we don't know, but you get the impression here that here Jesus used both his hands and, put them around his shoulders, or we're not sure. But he grabbed him. He held on to him. We see Jesus repeatedly in Scripture reaching out and touching people in a loving way. Lots of examples. When when Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law, it says he touched her. When children came to him, he put his hands on them and touched them and blessed them. When he healed a blind man, he touched his eyes. It's been said that about Jesus, what his heart felt, his hand touched. And contact with a leper is strictly forbidden. But Jesus touched him, and if you don't get anything else I was listening to, get this. Jesus touched him before he healed him. Now, if it was me, and I would have done the opposite, right? I'm going to heal you first, then I'll touch you. So why not heal him and then touch him? I think it's because Jesus loved the man just the way he was. The healing revealed Jesus' power, but the touch showed Jesus' love. Jesus could have healed him without touching him, but Jesus wasn't just healing him of leprosy. Jesus wanted to cure the idea of him of feeling not wanted. Jesus had a high-touch ministry, which stood in stark contrast to the no-touch attitude and ministry of the people during that day. Loving people who are hard to love has been described as love's greatest challenge. Turn maybe a page back, Matthew chapter 5. And to me, this is one of the most difficult verses in the Bible to live. Matthew 5, 43 and 44. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. And by the way, that's what the Pharisees, the religious people of that day, that's what they taught. Okay? But I say to you, what? Hate your enemy? No. Love. Love your enemy. Who do we need to love? All kinds of examples. Maybe the parent who abused us, the boss with the negative nitpicking, maybe the bully who called us names in school that we still can't forget. Maybe the spouse who's critical, always reminding us we don't do things right. The annoying relative who always ruins the holidays. We can go on and on with examples. But is there a name and face that come to mind? Who have we decided that it's just too hard to love them? The question I think that we need to ask is not will we love that person, but how will we love that person? Two questions to ask ourselves, I think, while learning how to love that person. Because every one of us have that person. First question, how has God loved me? When we think of people who are hard to love, there may be a number of names that might come to my mind, but probably not our own, right? But let's be honest, are we always easy to love? God doesn't love us because we're lovable. Remember, Romans 5:8 tells us God loved us while we were still sinners, while we were still His enemies. I think maybe the key is 1 John 4:9, and it says this: we love because He, God, first loved us. And I think that verse is really important. It means, number one, we can't manufacture love. The way to grow to love is not summing up some loving feelings. But he says in that verse, the way to grow in love is to be loved. We receive God's love and we're filled with it. And then it's going to start to overflow out of us. You know, we don't conjure up love, we're conduits of it. How's God loved us? You know, Paul talked about that, Romans 8:38 through 39. Neither death or life, angels, demons. He goes through that whole list. He says nothing will be able to separate us from the love of God. Second question. What would it be like to be the one we have a hard time loving? When there's a hard person to love in our life, I think we need to stop and ask ourselves, what's it like to be them? What's it like to walk in their shoes? And you know what? Chances are pretty good we don't have a clue about their background and everything that's going on in their lives. A couple other thoughts here and we'll close. You know, it's pretty easy, I think, to convince ourselves, you know, that we have a little bit of compassion for someone. And so, you know, we get out our microscope and detect a speck of positivity and we call it love. And you know, well, what's the saying? The proof's in the pudding. And I've always thought that was a strange expression. I'm not sure. I mean, what proof is found in what pudding? Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, that's just all free right there. But maybe a better phrase is this: the love is in the touching. Because what Jesus' heart felt, He touched. Jesus touched the leper because He knew he was suffering from skin hunger. Think of all the things that Jesus touched. I mean, he washed Judas's feet the night that he knew he was going to betray Him. Jesus told doubting Thomas to do what? Touch the holes in His hand. Are we willing to reach out and touch that person that's hard for us to love? Now, in my thought, you know, I had this thought, yeah, I can put two hands around their neck. Right? When Peter was, let me give us a couple more examples here, we'll close. You know, when Peter was sinking in the water, Jesus reached out. Yeah, there's a Roman soldier. I'm going to close with this example. There was a Roman soldier who was responsible for crucifying Jesus. He's the one who took Jesus' hands, nailed them to the cross. And that Roman soldier, that centurion, was the last person that Jesus touched before he died. And who could be harder to love than him? Yet on the cross, Jesus looked at that man. He looked to heaven. In Luke 23:34, he says, Father, what? Forgive them. What did that man need in that moment? He needed forgiveness, and Jesus gave it to him. All because of his love. You know, we love those who are hard to love because God has first loved us. And I'm telling you, we're hard to love. Who does our heart need to go out to? Who do we need to encourage, be patient with, give a hug, show them we love them, and touch them? Jesus understood the power of touch, and he made it central in his life. And you know what I find amazing? He didn't have a list of untouchables. But do we? Jesus' touch was for all. And Jesus' touch tells people you have worth. So that's the challenge. Reach out and touch someone. Drew, come lead us in